Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about mobile accessibility and screen readers, and we've got a lot to get through in the next 45 minutes, and we should have a nice chunk of time at the end for a Q&A. And just so that this is going to be as valuable as possible for everyone, I've got my colleague Jess, who's our accessibility expert, and she's on the call with us today, so she can help out with that Q&A section at the end for us. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to be looking at today? Well, first of all, I'm going to give a brief introduction into mobile accessibility. We're going to look at what it is, why it's important, and just really get that scene set. Then we're going to be looking at the relationship between accessibility and mobile responsive design before looking at how you can more effectively optimize for mobile moving forward. We're also going to have a look at some practical things that you can do to test for mobile accessibility yourself towards the end. And then, like I mentioned, we should have some time for a bit of a Q&A. So do feel free to ask those questions throughout the webinar, but we will just kind of reel through them all at the end. First of all, who am I? Well, my name is Adam Womersley. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm the written and audio content creator here at Silktide, and I've been here for about a year now, and I've learned so much about accessibility during that time that it's just been super, super valuable. Aside from that, I'm a writer, I'm a designer, I'm also a video game developer. So in other words, a complete nerd. So that's enough about me. Let's look at why we care so much about mobile. Well, mobile is underrated, at least in many organizations, even those who do try to make it a focus. But why is that? Well, the simple answer is that most people work in offices, right? So that means that they see desktop first and they in turn think desktop first. And that's part of the reason why the big thing that has been in web design for ages now is mobile first design. But why is that important? Well, it forces you to focus on getting across your core values, your proposition, and the message that you're trying to share all on a tiny little portrait screen. Because if you can make it work on a small screen, then making it bigger and work on desktop, well, that's easy. And that's important because search results that you get on mobile can be drastically different to what you get on desktop. They're completely separate. So when we say mobile first, we really do mean it. But while conceptually mobile first design and web accessibility, they're not the same thing, well, they really should be. You can't ignore accessibility. And most of the accessibility issues that are going to translate across both desktop and mobile. So let's look at a standard development cycle for a website. This is super simplified, but they're the steps that you'd often see at the start of a project. So you'd normally start with something like analysis, right? And then move to a wireframe and design phase, and then development and testing, and then launch. And then all too often, we find accessibility here at the end. And I can't stress enough, this is worst case scenario. Looking at accessibility last runs a lot of interesting risks. What about if it turns out that your brand logo and your brand colors just have a fundamental color contrast issue and they're just not accessible? Think about the amount of meetings, the amount of sign-offs, all that were required just to choose the right colors, right? Now you've got to do it all over again. Leaving accessibility to the end means that you're going to be paying the highest cost and spending the most time to get it right. And that's why we have the concept of shift left. This means that you take accessibility in your project plan and you push it as far to the left as you can. Because the sooner that you can start to consider accessibility in your process, the easier and cheaper it's going to be to do it right. And you might think this is what I mean, right? Just moving accessibility as a step before wireframe and design in the plan. But really, accessibility, it's an ongoing thing that you're going to want to include in every step of your website project and beyond. So even after you've launched that site. Now, we're going to be talking about a number of things to do with accessibility and optimization, because really they both go hand in hand and we need to stop trying to separate them. And one of the most obvious places that we can start when it comes to optimization is website speed. So why is speed important? Well, that's because we're all impatient. And if you don't believe me, well, some web pages can take 5 seconds to load. So let's see how long 5 seconds really is, starting now. That was 5 seconds. And research tells us that if you have a 5-second load time on your page, it means that 38% of your potential visitors just give up and move on, because we're all impatient, and that just felt like a long time. It's worth noting that the average page load time is 3.2 seconds, but if you want to make it to the first page of Google, you'll have to do even better than that. The reality is that 1.65 seconds is the average speed to get onto the first page of Google search results. But it's not about optimizing just for speed, because if you're doing the work to make your website load that fast, well, you're likely doing a lot more than just focusing on speed alone. Websites that are this fast are ticking all the other boxes that Google considers when it comes to search rankings, because if your website loads fast, then that's also a pretty good user experience. And that means that you're going to have a lower bounce rate, which leads to better SEO, which of course, that's going to have a knock-on effect to your overall website traffic and conversion rates. Everything here is connected, and it has a sort of ripple effect on the rest. So what about accessibility? Well, if you've got lots of large images and videos that aren't optimized, then they're going to take a lot longer to load on your site. And that's a speed issue, right? But you need to consider that your eye might have a super fast fiber optic broadband speed, and it might make this way less noticeable. But if there's a user with a much slower internet speed, or even on a mobile device with limited speed from their service provider, then those big assets that you have on your site, they're going to take even longer. And if your website isn't loading for these users, then they just simply can't access your website. And that is an accessibility issue. So you can see how these things from speed to UX to accessibility, they all overlap. So when it comes to your website's media, bigger is definitely not better. But what about the clickable elements on your website? Well, that's a different story. Here, size is everything. So let's look at target size. This is something that's going to be a bigger thing for accessibility as soon as WCAG 2.2 hits, but it's also a really big thing for usability too. First off, it's important to know what problem target size is trying to solve. And put simply, it's just about making sure that things that you can click on are actually easy to click on, because that's good user experience. I'm sure we've all experienced trying to click on a link or click on a button on mobile, but it's just too small or too close to something else, and we end up clicking on something else instead. It's a frustrating experience, right? And target size in WCAG 2.2 is looking to set a minimum size for these clickable elements so that you don't need a magnifying glass just to press a button. The image that I've got here, it's from W3C, right? And it shows target size and how it's all going to work. It looks super complicated, but let's go through it. So at the top, we've got a row of buttons. These are all sized at 44 pixels, and this is considered fine, right? They're considered big enough to be accessible. They're going to be easy to tap on. Beneath that, we've got the same row of buttons, but this time they're 24 pixels in size. And that's actually the minimum size that they can be to still be considered okay and accessible. But now things get a little bit more confusing. Below this, we have a row of buttons, which are 20 pixels in size. But importantly, they have a 4 pixel gap on each side. So the 20 pixels of the size of the button and the added space of that 4 pixels, well, that reaches 24, which is our minimum size, and therefore these are considered accessible. And finally, at the bottom, we have the same buttons, sized at 20 pixels, but without that 4 pixel gap. And that's lower than our minimum size of 24, and therefore considered inaccessible and not good enough. Now, I know this is a lot of information to digest, so let's actually see how it looks on an actual mobile device. Here we've got the same buttons and the same sizes, but we've actually got them on a mobile device display, so you can see how big or how small that they would look. And to be honest, if we look at the third row of buttons down here, so these are the ones which are 20 pixels with the 4 pixel gap between them, they should be more accessible, right? That's technically considered accessible, but they look like they're still going to be a nightmare to click on. And so while there's a lot of depth and nuance about this in the draft of WCAG 2.2 right now, the important thing to take away is that you should just make clickable things bigger, specifically bigger than 24 pixels. But let's face it here, if we look at the first row of buttons, that's 44 pixels, they're going to be so much easier to interact with, especially on mobile. So size does matter here. But what about if the user still wants things to be bigger? Well, that's where they can use pinch to zoom. And this has a huge impact on the user experience of your website. We've likely all done this before. It's when you use 2 fingers to pinch at the screen to zoom in or to zoom out. And that's huge, right? Because if something's too small for a user to see, then you need to give them the option to be able to zoom in. Now, unfortunately, it's a common thing for designers to actually disable pinch to zoom. And the problem is that that will massively affect your user's experience if you do that. As a side note, it's also worth noting that it's so much of a big deal that iOS devices will actually try and override any attempts to disable pinch to zoom. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen on Android, at least right now, but it's worth looking at this sort of thing on more than one device, or more than just an Apple device. Maybe check it on Android or whatever. But of course, pinch to zoom is not just a UX thing. It's also about accessibility. So users who might have different degrees of low vision, well, they might want to make stuff bigger so to a size that suits them. So pinch to zoom is good. But that doesn't mean that you should force users to do this all the time. And that's why font size is so important on mobile. You already have a much smaller screen if you're using a mobile device, right? So if the font size isn't resized enough to compensate for that, then you're stopping tons of people from actually being able to read your content. Even if users can pinch to zoom, you shouldn't force them to do it, just so that they can read that content of yours. And here's a good example of that, right? So on the left here, we've got a screenshot of the Silktide website. It's on a mobile device, and it's got some content on it that's in a pretty good size font. And I think we can all agree it's pretty easy to read, and that's a good user experience. No pinch to zoom required here unless the user wants to. Now let's look at another example. This time on the right, we have a screenshot of Business Insider on mobile. And if we look at it, the font size, it's way, way smaller. Now, if we take a step back and look at these side by side, both of these examples, which one of these do you think is going to be easier to read? And that is why font size is so important. It makes for a better user experience and it improves accessibility. And if you're using Silktide, we'll actually flag this because you're forcing users to use pinch to zoom in order to read the content, which can cause things like 2D scrolling, which is actually a failure in WCAG and something that you definitely want to avoid. So let's look at 2D scrolling a bit more. So when you visit a website on mobile, it should only move in one axis, so up and down or left to right, not both at the same time. And this happens when content doesn't correctly realign itself. It's called reflow in WCAG 2.1, and it's also a really big part of responsive design. And if you're subjecting your users to this, then they're just not going to have a good time on your website. And we've got a video on our YouTube channel that talks more about why websites that scroll in 2 dimensions, why they are so bad, along with a bunch of other stuff as well. So do check that out at silktide.com. YouTube.com/Silktide, worth checking. And as an aside, PDFs do this 2D scrolling stuff all the time. They absolutely suck. Just try using a PDF, downloading it on your phone and trying to read it. It's not a fun experience. Now, speaking of things that suck, forms. Forms suck so much harder on mobile if you do them wrong. So for example, autocomplete, especially on mobile, autocomplete matters. And it's something that you need to make sure that you've got set up properly so that your users can have that magical experience and don't need to type out all of their details every single time. And this is actually a WCAG requirement. And autocomplete is not just something for you to turn off. And due to changes coming in WCAG 2.2, well, you won't be able to do this for password fields either. So stop turning it off. Instead, do this, which is making sure that autocomplete is set up correctly and working properly. Now, I've got an example of a super long form here. It's pretty ugly and it'll be super tedious to fill out without something like autocomplete. But it's not just about autocomplete, because sometimes users do need to enter their details. And so when you are asking users to enter their details, you need to make sure that you're giving them the right keypad. So do you ever notice that sometimes when you're on a mobile device and you go to fill in something on a form and it will pop up with a different keyboard entirely? Well, that's input mode. And there's a surprising number of options, but we're just going to cover 2 real quick right now. So if they're entering a phone number, you obviously want to provide a keypad that has the relevant buttons. So the input mode tell, well, that gives you numbers 0 through to 9 in a keypad, and also gives you the plus, asterisk, and the hash so that users can add pauses or dial international numbers. And I've got 2 examples of this type of keypad here. The one on the left shows it on Android, and another one on the right shows it on iOS. It's also worth noting that on the iOS example, we've also got autocomplete set up correctly too. So let's look at another input mode, this time email. Now, this is using a standard QWERTY keyboard, but there's also the @ symbol and the period or full stop symbol that make it way easier to type out an email address. And doing this right makes such a massive difference to the experience of filling out a form on mobile. It's a better experience for all users. And from an accessibility side of things, it's going to remove cognitive burden and remove the amount of fine motor control that users need. And the less friction that you have, the higher your form's completion rates are going to be, and the happier your users will be too. And whenever I think about forms, I tend to think about screen readers, and I think that you should too. So let's talk about screen readers. First off, what is a screen reader? Well, you'd probably be able to guess. So screen readers, they just simply read the content that's on your screen, right? Well, no, not quite. They're actually a lot more clever than that. I think it's a really good way to think of them as translators. They'll essentially read the code of a web page and then translate that in a way to give the user complete control on how they want to digest that content. They'll also actually read some hidden information too in certain web page elements. So things like alternative text and skip to content that just help further describe what's going on and stuff like that. So we'll look at skip to content a little bit more in a bit more detail shortly. But first, let's look at a screen reader in action and actually see how it sounds. Okay.
Voiceover on link. Skip to main content. Free accessibility scan. Visited link. Get your visited link. Careers. Visited link. Support. Visited link. Contact. Visited link. Image. Silktide. Visited link. Solutions. Toggle solution submenu collapsed button. Toggle visit link. Category. Accessibility. Link. Read more about accessibility overlays are evil and they need to die.
Now, if you're a visual user, you've probably thought that was taking a very long time going through every single thing in the top navigation there, every single link, and that's because you probably skim read, right? We all skim read. That's the way that we find information on a web page as fast as possible. And screen readers allow screen reader users to do a very similar sort of thing, and that's why skip to content links are so important. Okay, so yeah, skip to content links, they're usually hidden links and they appear as we start to use a screen reader, and they allow us to skip all of those links in that top navigation and jump straight to, you guessed it, the main content on the page. So let's see one in action.
Visited link. Skip to main content. You are currently on a link inside web content. To click this link, press Ctrl Option Space to heading level 1. The easiest way to fix your websites. One platform to improve user experience, accessibility, content quality, and much, much more.
So notice how easy it is to get to the actual content that we want to read. And compare that to a website without a skip to content link.
Banner. Heading visited link image. WB. List 5 items. You are currently in a list. Visited link. About. Visited link. Wines. Visited link. Vineyards. 3. Visited link. Blog. Link. Contact. End of list. End of navigation. End of banner. Heading level 2. WHOER. You are currently on a heading level 2.
So now imagine trying to get through that on every single page. It's not a good experience, and that's why skip to content links are so important. But what about if you want to, skim read the rest of the content on the page? Well, continuing on the lines of that, screen readers also allow screen reader users to skip between other elements, so links or headings on a page, so that way they can find the information that they're looking for as fast as possible. I've got a quick example here. I've recorded this on my phone. This is using TalkBack, which is Android's built-in screen reader, and you'll see me skipping between headings.
The complete solution for web accessibility. Lines, words, characters, speech rate, links, controls, headings. No previous heading. Identify barriers. Prioritize efforts. Develop buy-in. Educate your team. Heading 2.
And this sounds great, but why is it important when we're looking at web accessibility? Well, if your website doesn't have links with clear link text or a correct heading structure, then you're stopping users from being able to access and understand your website's content. And that's a huge accessibility issue. So, for example, I've got some text here with some links in it. The text itself doesn't matter, it's just an example. But with the visual context that we have, it's easy enough for us to assume where these links are going to take us. Now, if we imagine that we're a screen reader and skipping between links, that visual context is suddenly removed. And instead, we get something like this. So our screen reader is going to read link, click here, link, click here, link, click here, link, click here. How can we possibly tell where these links are going to lead to? Well, we just can't. So how do we fix it? Well, we fix it with clear link text. So we have a sentence here which reads, bookings can be organized fortnightly during local booking center closures. Link, read more. But where does this read more link take us? Is it to information about fortnightly bookings? Is it information about booking center closures? A page about both? It's kind of hard to say. Now, if we look at this sentence, so bookings can be organized fortnightly during local booking center closures. Link, read more about your local booking center availability. By making this link text clear, we can really easily tell where this link is going to take us. And this is great for screen readers. Do you know what? It's actually great for everyone else too, since now everyone has a better idea of where this is going to lead. And so the important thing to know here is that computers read things differently to humans, right? So making our content work for both means that screen readers and in turn screen reader users, well, they're going to have a much better time on your website. But this benefits you in other ways too. Because do you know what else reads web pages in a similar way to screen readers? Google. So the way that Google crawls your website and reads your content, it's very similar to screen readers. And obviously Google takes that information alongside a bunch of other stuff and decides how it's going to rank your site. So if you make sure that your website works great with screen readers, then Google's going to have a better time with it too. So who uses screen readers? Well, the common misconception is they're just for blind people or people with low vision. And these are frequent users of screen readers, but it's not exclusive to them. They're used by so many more people than that. For example, screen readers can be helpful for people with lower literacy, for non-native speakers, people with cognitive disabilities, and for anyone who just prefers to listen to content in place of or in addition to other methods of reading. And some research by WebAIM found that some really interesting data. They surveyed a bunch of screen reader users and they found that people without disabilities use screen readers too. More than 12% of the users said that their use of a screen reader wasn't due to a disability at all. And that's a really important point. I've got a comic here showing Nancy using a laptop looking angry. She says, reading social media all day is making me grumpy. A voice off screen says, why don't you go outside? Nancy says, fine. And in the final frame, Nancy is sat outside with her laptop in a lush green environment with the sun shining. But Nancy still looks angry and says, now there's glare on my screen. I'm sure we can all relate to Nancy. Glare from the sun it is a problem, especially on mobile phones. And in fact, it is considered a situational impairment. Among other things, like being a new parent and only having one hand to operate your phone with. There's also temporary impairments like an arm injury or having an ear infection that makes it difficult to hear. The point is, situational and temporary impairments, well, they happen to all of us. So what's the lesson here? Well, we've looked at how improving your website speed and user experience can also improve accessibility. We've also looked at screen readers, an accessibility tool, and how optimizing your website for them can also improve other areas of your website, like your UX. Because the truth is that everything is connected, and focusing on accessibility can improve your entire website for all users. And these sorts of things help with situational and temporary impairments that we can all experience, just like Nancy. So I want to say that when we talk about accessibility, it's not just about people with disabilities. It's about everyone, because everyone benefits from accessibility. So how should you test for mobile accessibility on your website? Well, here's some nifty things that you can do. Of course, one way is to look at your website on a mobile device and try and find these issues yourself. If you're doing this, we'd recommend that you do it on the smallest device you can, so something like an iPhone SE or Android-sized equivalent. And if you do want to stay on your desktop, you can switch to a mobile simulator, which I'll show you how to do with this quick video now. So I'm on the Apple website at the moment, and if I wanted to go ahead and see this site and browse it in a mobile view, all I need to do is just right-click anywhere on the screen, and you can see Inspect down at the bottom. If I go ahead and click Inspect, you can then see at the top left right here, there's a small icon of a phone and a tablet, and this is the device toolbar. So I can go ahead and toggle this on, and you can see straight away we're now in a mobile view. So while you can do this, it is worth noting that it's not going to be a complete substitute for testing on a real mobile device. You know, if you don't have one, then you can try testing page by page in Google Lighthouse. And you can do this in inspect mode, very similar to showing that that mobile simulator there. But if you just Google for page speed insights, it's the same thing. It's just a better UI. But yeah, you can drop in your URLs for each page one at a time and kind of build a report. It's quite slow, but it's certainly worth giving a go. Or you can use tools like Silktide. And this will test every page on your website for desktop and mobile automatically. So it's a much smoother way of improving your website for mobile accessibility and tracking that progress over time. So if you're not currently using Silktide, then you can request a demo and speak to the team. Just head over to silktide.com, use the request a demo button, and we'll be happy to give you a sample scan report of your site, give you some pointers, all of that sort of stuff. But before we wrap up, I want to challenge you. So not to a fight, but after this webinar, I want you to try and find half an hour or an hour to actually try using a screen reader on your website. And if you don't want to download anything, then you can always use the disability simulator that we have. It's a Chrome extension. It's free. You can just download it and install it into your Chrome browser. But it's got a screen reader simulator as part of that. Either way, whether you do that or you use another method, it's, you know, just try and find the time to try using a screen reader on your site. And I promise you, it's something that you will learn so much from. Now, if you've never actually used a screen reader before, it can be quite daunting. Maybe you've even tried it, but found it too difficult. And trust me, I totally understand. And that's why over the past few months, we made this interactive field guide. And you can download this for free. All you need is a smartphone and a working camera. And we'll guide you through how to enable and use your smartphone's built-in screen reader. We'll also give you QR code links that link to pages that actually have accessibility flaws. So you can see these common mobile accessibility issues and actually experience how it feels if you're relying on assistive technology like a screen reader. So in less than an hour, you'll have a really good understanding of how it all works, what those common accessibility issues are, and how you can fix them. So feel free to check that out if you haven't already. That'd be great. But yeah, that about wraps up our session for today. We'll be answering your questions in just a moment, but I do hope that that session's been useful for you and you've got some good takeaways. And I really do hope that you decide to take me up on my challenge and just try experiencing a screen reader on your site. But yeah, do let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to see more of as well. So let's move on to Q&A featuring my colleague Jess. I'm going to give my voice a break now and give you all a break from my voice and just read out any of your questions. And Jess is going to be hot on it to answer those. So let me open up this Q&A. So yeah, we've got a few questions through.
Yeah, I've been answering a few of them in text.
Oh, nice.
I figured I'd get us going. We can go back over them. So just to start with the ones that haven't had a text response. What would you recommend for pages that have a lot of repetitive links, like multiple pricing page links on a product page? Should the link text always be the same? So link text needs to clearly explain where the link is going, right? And it cannot be duplicated if it goes to a different URL, right? So you can't have like contact us up in like, you know, the main nav and then a different contact us in the footer, which just say contact us, but they go to completely different places. Doesn't work. You are confusing users and it's a WCAG violation. I know it went by really quickly, but in one of the videos Adam used of the Silktide website, it was a read more link, but it said read more about why accessibility overlay should die. Because what it's actually doing is saying read more and then reading the title of the blog post, right? And they're actually coded that way. So we get what the marketing team wants, read more buttons. Yeah. But we also provide the information you actually need to be able to decide if you want to click the button, right? Part of the way that actually works is that we hide the title, so you get read the blurb and then read more about what the title was. It's kind of cool. There's lots of things you can do like that if you really want things like read more links. Mostly, I think you just need to make sure your links don't duplicate unless they are literally going to the same place. It might require a little bit of creativity, as you said, if it's a repetitive links for multiple pricing pages and links to products, you're going to have to think about how best to do that. But one solution is ARIA. The main reason I would be vaguely concerned about that is that if you're using your voice to navigate, you want to be able to say click link with what it says, right? So it is risky to do things like too much duplication. What screen reader would you recommend for testing? Currently, we use NVDA. Right. So, generally speaking, on Windows, we do want to look at NVDA. I honestly, if you're going to be doing real testing, you want to look at NVDA. You're going to want to look at JAWS, and ideally, you're going to want to look at a bit of voiceover too, to kind of get a rounded out view. And the reason I say this, and I know you're like, what? Yeah, is because you'd be surprised at the weird problems you encounter. Literally, I have a customer who is dealing with a problem where they have set up everything, from my perspective, completely right. It literally follows the WCAG spec. And for some reason, JAWS is fine, VoiceOver is fine, NVDA not fine. It doesn't read the labels on the form at all. It just says, like, option not ticked, right? You're like, what is this? And I have no idea why it's doing that. Specifically, things like ARIA have not universal support. Right. So like over time, the different combinations of browser and screen reader are kind of coming together and getting us closer. But right now they're not even. So you actually get a different experience when you use NVDA with Chrome than you do with Firefox. And the same goes for JAWS. Like the combinations change things. So that's kind of an important detail, and it's something to remember when you're looking at VoiceOver, because someone asked about what the Macintosh version was. It's VoiceOver. It's the same name on your Apple Watch, your phone, your desktop. It's all VoiceOver. But VoiceOver acts differently in Chrome than it does in Safari, right? That's the Mac one. So, yeah. I wish, like, honestly, it's been 10 years. Why are they not, like, just universally awesome? Someone needs to explain this to me. Someone also said, to back up what Jessica said, when using a keyboard to navigate a website, it's good to have a link. It really is. So the question, because I'm just going to recap this one real quick, was about using the role main, which is a landmark. Landmarks are awesome. I'll be the first to say it. Landmarks are awesome. Everyone should use them, right? Give definitions to the areas of your site so someone knows that, like, this area is the main navigation. This area, is the footer, right? That helps them understand where they are. However, it doesn't skip over the problem that if you are using, say, a keyboard or just about any non-mouse version of navigating a website, those skip to main content and other skip options that you might put in there at the very top that are visually hidden unless you like tab to them, for example, those are necessary. Yeah, so it's probably best to use both, because landmarks are great, but there isn't a super simple, easy way that everyone knows who's using a keyboard to be able to have the same functionality, right? So it's a good thing to just allow people to tab a couple times, get the skip to content, and then they can get to where they need to be. Because honestly, some like main navigations can run to 17, 30, more links, right? And that's a lot of tabbing or button pressing with your head or your feet. You know, it's just a lot to ask. Adam, how do you turn over VoiceOver on a Mac?
Yeah. So yeah, the shortcut is Command F5, and that's how you can enable and disable VoiceOver on Mac.
See? Okay, hearing doing it right, we should be able to provide an accessible website. However, there are several tools on the market that add on to a website, making it more or even more accessible. I want to know what these tools are. Would you say it makes sense to use such additional tools? Would that decrease efforts of making the website accessible? I think I know what you're talking about. Okay, Silktide's position on overlays. They don't like them. My position on overlays. Your heart's in the right place. It is. Yeah, you want to help people, so you're like, let me provide extra stuff. Here's the problem. Just about everything that you find in these overlays is something that a user who has like assistive technology and other specific needs, they will have set at the browser or operating system level, right? They don't want to be changing it and rearranging it every time they come onto your website. They're not going to be interacting with it, right? If they need reduced motion, that's a setting in the operating system. If they need higher color contrast, that's a setting in the operating system, right? Like all the things they do feel like a lot of bells and whistles, but the reality is most of them aren't actually adding anything they didn't have access to before. And you need to test on your own website whether or not it's actually changing anything, and if it's changing it the way it needs to be. Like, I can't stress that enough, because if you have one of those overlays that has like reduced motion as a toggle, it better be working. Otherwise, what is the point of even having it? But it means your website needs to respond to that command to reduce motion. Honestly, anyone who says that they're just going to make everything better for you and it's $50 a month, it's I wish, I do. I wish so much. I really do. Honestly, I would be happy to be out of work because every website was totally accessible and you could just ride off into the sunset knowing that everyone has equal access to all the information on the web. Unfortunately, that's just not how things work yet. Maybe another 5 years, AI will get us there. Maybe. I'm not prepared to say it won't. Yeah, but we are definitely not there now. And honestly, I find it a little scary how willing people are to rely on something like that. And I don't think it comes from a place of malice. I think it comes from a lack of understanding of what the requirements for accessibility are. Yeah, and then there's a phrase I always come back to, which is the nothing about us without us. Yeah, there's nothing quite as good as talking to the disabled community, and saying, what do you actually need? There's a wide range of things. Like when we talk about screen readers, everyone says, oh, it's about keyboard navigation. It isn't always. There are screen reader users who are using their mouse. Yeah, like you just have to recognize that there's a big world out there. So unfortunately, I think the answer is don't use them. If you're doing the work to make your website accessible, don't put up a flag on it that isn't helping and is just distracting and covering up a bunch of your screen. How does a screen reader handle pop-ups? Well, that depends on how the pop-up is operating. As an example, I generally try to disable Slack when I'm using a screen reader because, well, they've done something to make it less annoying. Every time someone messaged me and it does a little pop-up in the corner, at least on Windows, I don't know how it works on Mac, it would just refocus there and be like, I have to interrupt my sentence to go read you what this alert says. So annoying. I don't like pop-ups as a general rule. However, if you do use them, pay attention to things. This is especially where ARIA comes into play. Pay attention to things like how important it is that you interrupt people to talk about it. Are you putting the focus on it? Have you set a keyboard trap so that if it pops, right, and like covers up a bunch of the screen, that you guarantee someone using a keyboard can quickly close it or interact with it however they need to, right? There's so many things that go into this to making sure that you aren't literally just stopping people from accessing your website properly. Is there a way to make items being read by a screen reader? Items being read by a screen reader that doesn't get captured in audio transcription service when the user tries to record a memo. Not 100% sure what you're asking. The problem with audio transcription and things like that is that anything done automatically is iffy. I find Zoom's auto transcription to not be so bad, but you still definitely have to go back over it. And just like with any video content, you need to be thinking about, especially when you do your transcript, whether or not you're making sure you include all the information that might have been there visually, even if it was just like kind of something in the background. If it was important, then you need to make sure that it's available in all the different methods. But feel free to update me on that because I may have totally gotten your question wrong. Which screen reader software do you recommend for mobile devices? I can't recommend. They come with it built in. You get what you get, right? If you have an iPhone, it comes with VoiceOver. The iPhone is actually considered one of the most accessible devices on the planet. It's actually kind of brilliant. I'm really impressed with it. I say this as a Windows user. But when it comes to Android, it comes with something called TalkBack. Adam is far more familiar with TalkBack than I am. I don't have an Android. I have like 5 different iPhones of different sizes on my desk. Like that's it. So me personally, I like VoiceOver on iOS, but that's because it's what I'm familiar with. I think you'll find with a lot of people as time goes by, the one they use the most or the one they were introduced to is just the one they use. Like to get really comfortable with them takes so much time that I don't know a lot of people who've made drastic changes.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that they're so different as well. Like all of the gestures that you use on screens and stuff with the mobile screen readers, they are all so different. And we noticed that when we're putting together that field guide and actually testing it ourselves, just how different the gestures can be. It can be very confusing to just because you know one doesn't mean that you can just use another automatically.
I am putting the overlay fact sheet into, seriously, remember I just said like Slack never stops. So overlayfactsheet.com. When we're talking about overlays and things like that, seriously, just start there. Have a read. Like it's not just us, right? Like when we talk about overlays and things, Haven Gurma has made a video about how she feels about encountering them. So it's worth having a look at what other people are saying. Could somebody do a 6-month course on how to make large HTML tables accessible? That's a good idea. Not sure it would take 6 months. The reality is tables are kind of brutal. Never forget to use, the call and like. I think if we just accept that all tables should have these things in them, it makes it easier to navigate them with a screen reader. But the reality is massive tables are a pain, whether you're a visual user or a non-visual user, right? Like one of the things we talk about a lot internally is how to explain a table or explain a graph or explain data so that you can get like a rundown of what the important points were without necessarily having to interact with it in what could be a really unpleasant. I see you. Sorry, my cat is howling. This used to pick it up, but it doesn't now. But it's an interesting question. I'm going to bring it to the team and talk about it because I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about. And we definitely haven't really covered tables. Good point. Most tables don't need to be tables. That's something people should think about. Does this need to be a table? Like, I forgot the most important detail where I literally go, does this really need to be a table? But a complex table, maybe. Yeah. We have a huge website on multiple platforms. Would you recommend optimizing it by user journey, making sure each journey is fully accessible? Would you optimize by each feature, make it possible to tab through, improve contrast, and skip to content links, etc.? Huge website, multiple platforms. Fun. People like you are going to need help, right? This is where automation is really, really useful, because testing it out is going to flag up a bunch of things at scale, because looking at it as optimizing by user journey or making, like when you work with, say, Silktide and we test your website, right? One of the things we do is try to give you like the quick wins, things we think are like easier to do, but have a big impact. As we help you prioritize based on like how long something's going to be, how complicated it is, does it need dev, or is it something a content editor can do? Like all those things come into like how you figure it out. Honestly, like I go page by page when I fix things, or I'm like, we need to fix the template, and that is always the starting point, right? Fix the things that are universal, and then see if you can narrow down on some of the more finicky things. And no matter what, find out where your forms are and look at them, because I've almost never encountered properly done forms in the wild. There's always some sort of problem. Like, they just are. Also, skip to content links are always a quick win. Always. Right? If you don't have one, it's the fastest thing for people to notice. And if you're in the US, I cannot stress enough, you need skip to content and you need good focus states, because 4 or 5 hits of the tab key and I know your website isn't accessible and it's over. Does the Silktide's extension screen reader simulator imitate a specific screen reader? No. And I love this thing, and I love for the record, if you go to silktide.com/toolbar, I will put that link in here too. You can download a free Chrome plugin. This lets you simulate different disabilities and kind of experience some of the barriers that other people would face. So you can look at your own website and like, have a look at what it's like when you have problems with color blindness, or it doesn't quite go as blurry as it is when I take my off, but that kind of thing. And in it, there is a screen reader simulator. So instead of having to either engage with voiceover or narrator, that's the one that's built into Windows, it's just there, or download NVDA or pay for JAWS or any of these things, right? You can use this to get an idea of how your website actually sounds, right? So it can be really useful, especially when you're starting out. If you're like, oh, this seems like a big leap, it's great for that. But it is a simulator, so it doesn't have the capabilities that, say, JAWS does. Exams of various sorts require candidates to scan tables and work out what their contents mean. And the idea is, to an extent, cause pain. So no getting around the requirement to make the pain equal for all through table accessibility. The alternatives are not necessarily more accessible. It's an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I don't remember an exam I had to take where I had to scan a table to, but I'm assuming the point of this is that you have to look at it and like translate the data yourself into something else, right? Like read through this, identify what the answer to the question is, and move on from there. That's a tough one. I get that you think that part of that is to make it difficult, as you said, to cause pain. But I'm not sure what the best answer is for that. I think that would be one you'd have to look at by like a case-by-case basis. And again, that would be a user testing kind of thing, where you're like, we expect the average user to require this amount of time, to be able to do this. And are you creating a situation where the additional time that's often like allowed when taking an exam, where you say like, I need additional time, and often they like give you an extra hour, or maybe they even double it, but you need to know if like that's still viable, or have you created something that actually isn't going to be possible within a given time frame because of the technology required. And is there a different way you could approach this to get the same kind of effect with someone who isn't able to see the table visually?
yeah, I just want to say thank you everyone for showing up today. I hope you enjoyed the session. But thanks again. Thanks, Jess, as well. And well, bye-bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.